And this is, the MAGA Republicans have talked about disbanding the FBI, abolishing the FBI.
We have the power of the purse, Maria. The Congress is this country's checkbook, and we can start cutting funds to the FBI. And that's what we'll have to do. We'll have to start cutting their checkbook a little bit.
Here's MAGA Republican Chris Stewart.
But when people say it's time to disband the FBI, to delegate those authorities to others such as U.S. Marshals, there's a growing number of people in Congress who begin to feel this way. My gosh, you could go back to Martin Luther King and then blackmailing Martin Luther King. And then we ask, well, are they going to do it again in 2024? Actually completely defund them.
And then, of course, it's spread on the propaganda network of Fox.
And I think a lot of people rightly are calling for the FBI to be defunded, and maybe, a new premier law enforcement agency will come up in its wake, Stephen Miller, because unfortunately, I think it's been so politicized and weaponized, I'm not sure you can even fix it at this point.
That was Hannity.
There's not a lot to be said about the Durham report. We already knew that this thing was a bust a year or two ago. There was, after all was said and done, he brought, I think it was charges against, was it 3 or 4 people? I think the 3 of them were exonerated. Maybe it was 3 people total and 2 were exonerated. But the bottom line was he was not able to get a conviction even on the most simple of stuff.
He brought criminal charges against just 3 people, lost both cases that went to trial, and in the third case, an ex-FBI lawyer pleaded guilty to altering an email that was used to support a surveillance application. But
this is the FISA thing, right? He got 12 months of probation.
Right.
I think he did another 400 hours of community service.
Yeah, but no jail
And
time.
to be clear, the judge said this was a function of the lawyer, it's a low-level lawyer, writing a letter in support of a FISA warrant, that the judge said specifically he took, quote, an inappropriate shortcut. That is the sum product of a 4-year investigation, twice as long as the Mueller investigation, incidentally. $7 million, dozens of investigators. We should also add that not only did Durham come up with nothing, the Senate Intelligence Committee, I will say, led by Republicans, spent 3.5 years reviewing millions of documents, interviewing tens, if not hundreds of witnesses, and found that, yeah, you know what? The FBI did have a legitimate reason to begin this investigation. In addition, the Department of Justice Inspector General, under, I believe it was the Trump administration, and Bill Barr, also found there was no political bias in the launch of the initial FBI investigation.
You mean the FBI is not Democrats?
It turns out, oddly enough, that the FBI are not Democrats. You will also recall that there is specific data, and I'm not saying this is the reason, but I've said multiple times, there's about 12 reasons why Hillary Clinton lost that election. One of them was the letter that James Comey read aloud in the run-up to the election in October. And to be clear, we have data which shows what that did to Hillary Clinton's chances. Now, you have an election that close, you have multiple mistakes made by Hillary Clinton in campaigning, you have things like an open Supreme Court seat. That letter was just one element in the mix. But certainly there is data that shows that it impacted the polling anyways, right after it. At no time. So the idea that somehow, I guess the spin is that Hillary Clinton colluded with the Russians to make sure that she lost the election. Put out this Ben Shapiro tweet. I found this amazing, and this is going to be indicative of what you're going to see. Here's Ben Shapiro. Oh, blue check. Did he pay for that? He must have. That's embarrassing. Oh, I'm sure he had to do it because of video reasons. The Durham report shows, in essence, collusion between the government, between the Clinton campaign, the FBI, and the Obama administration to weaponize government power against Trump. It is appreciably worse than Watergate. It was far deeper in the bowels of the government. I'm not sure what that means. And reached to the highest levels. Incidentally, for those of you who are too young to know, the President of the United States resigned because of his involvement in Watergate and had to be pardoned by the following Republican president. So I don't, are we talking God here? Who is at the higher levels of government than the President of the United States?
The smoking gun tape was literally Nixon asking the head of the CIA to stop this investigation of the stuff, or we'll get into the Bay of Pigs stuff, which you don't want to come out. So that's pretty deep in the bowels, I'd say.
That's pretty bowely. But they need to do this. You'll remember when the Mueller report came out, Bill Barr summarized it 2 weeks before it was released. Maybe it was a week.
Hopefully gave us the
and he said there's
notes.
nothing here. And also he lied about what the Mueller investigation was tasked to do and the limits in which it was supposed to be investigating. And then the Mueller report came out, and it was quite clear it was an invitation to the Congress to impeach the president over this stuff. Garland, on the other hand, just released this because it would be untoward of him to do anything like what Bill Barr did in terms of interpreting it. So essentially what you get is more of the same. The institutionalists allow this stuff to happen. It's absurd. We had a Republican-controlled Senate investigation. We had a Republican-controlled DOJ Inspector General investigation. We had a 4-year investigation by John Durham. And the only thing that produced was 12 months of probation for a low-level lawyer because the judge said, quote, he took an inappropriate shortcut. And we're just going to be, we're going to hear about this stuff for ages. We're back to pre-Trump rules, essentially, in the media. Here is Sean Hannity speaking about this report.
Years and years and years of waiting with the 2020 election safely now in the rearview mirror, the DOJ has finally published the findings of the Durham probe. Remember that? Now, long story short, every single thing that we reported to you on this program, we were correct. We've been vindicated time and again, especially today. Everything the media mob reported for almost 3 long years, day in and day out, nothing but lies and conspiracy theories.
Okay, there it is. I should say, however, this is written up by the Talking Points memo, citing the New York Times. In January, Times reporter Charlie Savage wrote about the Durham report and the massive investigation. One of the bombshells from that report was that Durham's portfolio had been secretly expanded to include an allegation of wrongdoing against Donald Trump. From Charlie Savage's reporting, Mr. Barr and Mr. Durham never disclosed that their inquiry expanded in the fall of 2019 based on a tip from Italian officials to include a criminal investigation into suspicious financial dealings related to Mr. Trump. The specifics of the tip and how they handled the investigation remain unclear, but Mr. Durham brought no charges over it. So it turns out that in the course of this investigation, for whatever reason, Bill Barr gets these tips into the DOJ. Where does he take these? Does he give them to another investigator? Hey, or does he say, oh, this is related somehow to the way the FBI functioned in 2016, in 2017, and in 2018? No, he gives them to Durham. And if you look into the Durham report, you will see nothing about those charges. Savage wrote, Italian officials unexpectedly gave Mr. Barr and Mr. Durham a tip about a suspected financial crimes linked to Mr. Trump. While the tip was unrelated to the Russia investigation, Mr. Barr had Mr. Durham investigate the matter rather than referring it to another prosecutor. Mr. Durham brought no charges. Mr. Durham's report did not mention any of those matters. So let's be clear what happened here. Bill Barr, for some completely unexplained reason, gave a guy investigating the investigators about Donald Trump from 2016, 2017, 2018, a new lead about a completely different crime potentially committed by people close to Donald Trump, including maybe Donald Trump, we don't know, that took place in 2019. He gave it with this investigator, and the investigator, instead of reporting back also, we just want you to know, in this 306-page exhaustive report, we just want you to know, we looked into this, there was nothing there. Not even that. And of course, that investigation apparently is over. It's been buried. The whole thing was just a sham. And we're going to be treated to a couple of days worth of we're going to be treated to a couple of days worth. But if your uncle watches Fox News, or if your cousin reads the Daily Wire, I can tell you what you're going to be reading about for the next year and a half.
I got to say, though, hearing Hannity say the Durham report, you remember that?
Durham probe, remember that?
Yeah, exactly. No. The Durham report that we didn't talk about for the past 2 years when it was clear there was nothing in there. Like when we first got inkling that this wasn't going to show up. Remember when Donald Trump was like, release the report before the election? Well, now we know why he didn't, right? Because there was nothing there.
He's in Washington, D.C., independent. Good morning, Paulette.
Good morning. I'm calling concerning the debt ceiling. When the Bush tax cuts were made permanent, that was made permanent so we could raise the debt ceiling. Additionally, people compare the poor people with the rich people. Nobody knows what middle class is. It's $70,000. If I'm making $20 an hour, I pay Social Security on 100% of my salary. If I make $1 million a year, I pay Social Security taxes on less than 11% of my salary. This country needs to know what rich is. 98% of the people make less than $400,000 a year. That's my comment.
Anna, what do you think?
I loved her comment, and she's absolutely right about that. I think that the middle class has been completely gutted in this country, and the majority of people who do pay their taxes pay a far larger percentage or share of their annual income to prop up the federal government with their taxpayer money. And where does that money go? While the richest people get to benefit from the low taxes that were already low prior to Trump, but Trump further lowered them without doing away with corporate tax loopholes and other deductions that only the wealthy can take advantage of. They get away with all of that, and we, the taxpayers, end up funding endless wars abroad, endless military spending. At the same time, we keep getting nickeled and dimed when it comes to any social safety net program. We get told that we're bums and that we need work requirements, as if we're all laying around doing nothing if we end up needing a little bit of help from the government because these corporations have starvation wages. Wages have not kept up with inflation in the United States since the 1970s, and our wages were further degraded thanks to inflation that was the product of price gouging and corporate greed. So I love that comment. That statement was 100% correct. And if you really take a step back and you see this country not through the lens of partisan politics, but through the lens of understanding that corporations own our media, they own our politicians from both parties, and they're the real decision makers. They're the ones who actually impact the policies here. And guess what? They're not our friends. They're not looking out for us. They're looking out for themselves. And it's pretty clear when you consider how much they pay in taxes compared to what ordinary working Americans are paying in taxes.
Stephen is in Baltimore, Maryland, Democrat. Go ahead, Stephen.
Hello, big fans of you guys. I watch most of what you guys do on YouTube. I'd like to know, why can't we convince the American people that we should have the kind of safety net that they have in Europe? That they get child care, they get medical, they get time off when they have a baby, and They take time off. In America, we don't even take time off. We let our vacation days just go.
Jen, what do you think? Sorry. Whoever wanted to answer that.
I would love to jump in on that, sorry, because I'll tell you why. You look at polling and you'll notice that the vast majority of Americans love those policy proposals, paid family leave, the ability to, get paid more for the work that we're doing, raising the minimum wage. I mean, all of those progressive policies that we see in, let's say, Scandinavian countries tend to poll really, really well here in the United States. And so where's the disconnect, right? If the majority of Americans want it, why don't our politicians actually fight to pass those types of policies? Well, it's because their moneyed interests, the very people who are funding their campaigns, do not like those policies, because in order to successfully implement them, you would need resources. You would need to ensure that the wealthiest people who are getting away with murder right now are paying their fair share. And so they legally bribe our politicians to avoid passing those policies. And so elections increasingly become culture war battles, right? So it's part of the reason why the transgender debate takes up 95% of the air in the room right now, because it's a perfect culture war issue to pit ordinary Americans against each other and distract them from the fact that the corporate wings of both parties are in cahoots and working on behalf of moneyed interests. That is exactly what's happening right now. And my plea to the American people is to be privy to that strategy, be privy to what's really going on here, and do not allow them to distract you from the economic justice that Americans deserve.
Yeah, I got to jump in on that.
Sure, go
ahead. Listen, the progressive policies that the caller's talking about are deeply popular in the country. The only reason why they don't pass is because of corporate politicians and corporate media. And let me give you specific examples so you know what I'm talking about. Number one, $15 minimum wage polls at about 2/3, 3/4 of the country. Very, very popular. Whenever it's a ballot measure, it doesn't matter if it's Arkansas or Missouri or Florida, whichever red state, it passes easily because the American people want it, including a majority of Republican voters. So why don't we have it? Well, the Democrats pretend to be in favor of it. Joe Biden comes and says, I'm going to do $15 minimum wage. The very first interview he does after he gets inaugurated, he says, well, we're probably not going to do it. Oh, so you never meant it. You were lying. In fact, we know that he was lying because Bernie Sanders forced a vote on it, and the two Delaware senators, his two top allies in the Senate, voted against $15 minimum wage. That's Joe Biden saying, I never meant it. I was lying the whole time. Is there any reporters in the country? You didn't notice that the two Delaware senators voted against $15 minimum wage? Paid family leave polls at 84%. 74% of Republicans want it. In Estonia, they don't get 82 days. They get 82 weeks off after having a baby. We get zero, none. We send our mothers, are the people who brought us into this world, back to the assembly line, back to the coal mines, the day after they have a baby. It is unconscionable. And is Joe Biden, who is pretending to be in favor of that, is he doing anything about it? Why don't you force the Republicans to vote against 3/4 of their own voters? Because he doesn't want it. It's all theater. And the minute you propose anything that helps the average American, like Medicare for All, which is universal health care that every other developed nation on earth has, all of a sudden, what does the media do? How are you going to pay for that? Did you ever see that when we talk about the giant defense bills where we throw all that money in the garbage? The defense contractors, they rob us blind. I don't see Jake Tapper going, how are you going to pay for that? The minute it helps the average American, free college, how are you going to pay for that? The media is corporate. The politicians are corporate. We live under corporate rule. It's time for a rebellion.
Janine, as a Democrat leading toward Biden, what would you like to see from a president?
Let's see. I'm going to pick education, and I'm going to say that education is a key issue in our society. So I want no books banned. I'm very anti anything being banned. You don't want your kid to read it? That's fine. I want my kid to read a little bit.
What about like
2,500 books banned so far? Well,
the trans advocacy.
I have one daughter. She can read whatever she wants to read at an age appropriate to what she is. That is African American history, Native American history, Latino history, Asian history, Caucasian history. All history should be taught in public schools.
And that'll be the last time she was allowed on Fox News.
No, we keep hearing the House Republicans talk about reducing the deficit, but they're not willing to raise a penny in revenue from rich people, which just leads me to conclude this has nothing to do really with deficits and debt. It does have to do with, as some have said, trying to shrink government. I'm hoping maybe we can dispel at least one myth, which is that the Trump tax cuts actually paid for themselves. In other words, they didn't raise more revenue over time than they gave up. If we could just start with you, Mr. Kogan.
Yes, Senator, you are correct. Federal revenues are lower than they would have been if not for the Trump tax cuts.
Yeah.
The Trump tax cuts did not pay for themselves. I provide documentation in my statement.
I agree they did not pay for themselves and they did not trickle down to employee earnings.
I prefer to think of the tax cuts as a one-time cost. I don't think they're an ongoing contributor to the deficit.
Well, I'm looking at something, Mr. Michel, that when you put together when you were at the Heritage Foundation, and you've got 12 myths, and one of the myths, and I'm quoting, is that the tax cut pays for itself, the Trump tax cut. Are you changing your mind today about that conclusion?
No, I'm not.
Okay. So just to be clear, the Trump tax cut did not pay for itself, correct?
The cost was largely a one-time cost. The economy was projected to grow over
I'm
time.
just looking at your own report here, right? It didn't pay for itself in the second.
I'm agreeing with you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hodge.
The Tax Foundation modeled every iteration of what became the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from the beginning to the end, and at no time did our model ever predict that it would pay for itself.
What I hear from my colleagues in this hearing is more chaos, an appetite not for solutions, but an appetite to pander to grievances. They don't want to solve the problem. That's not worth anything to them politically. They want to stoke fear. When the Border Patrol seizes fentanyl at the border, God bless them, thank them for doing that, they don't celebrate the Border Patrol. They try and use that to own the libs and clap back at Joe Biden. Where I come from, when cops do their job and catch the bad guys and take drugs off the street, we thank them. We don't use them as political tools because we don't have any ideas or solutions when it comes to immigration. When they say we are a country of open borders, that doesn't recognize the thousands of Border Patrol agents who work on the border, work hard every day, and are trying to make sure we can secure the border. But what it does is it invites people to believe that the borders are open, and it invites more immigration to our country. Again, they don't want to solve this problem. If they wanted to solve this problem, they would have brought to the floor the comprehensive immigration bill from 2014, where 68 Republican and Democratic senators voted to secure the border, to put 20,000+ more border agents on the border, to have a pathway for earned citizenship, to take care of the dreamers who came here by no fault of their own. Republicans and Democrats voted for that. They walked away from it. And so this is really just more border theater, not border solutions. Mr. Hatfield, thank you for being a serious participant in this process. And I would just like to ask you, if we had passed that comprehensive immigration bill, the bipartisan bill back in 2014, where the most conservative members of the Senate joined some of the most liberal members of the Senate, where would we be today as far as immigration in America?
There's no panacea, but we'd be in a much, much better place. We would have a fighting chance to address this issue. I mean, Congress has not passed immigration reform about legal pathways since 1990. We barely had we didn't have the internet then, right? Most people didn't have computers then. This was a totally different world, and that legal pathways have been totally ignored for 33 years.
And talk to me about a shortage of labor, and I see this in all sectors across my district. I see it in childcare, I see it in tourism, I see it in hospitality, I see it in construction. I've got 50+ wineries in my district. I see it with the wineries when harvest comes. What would an earned pathway or a skilled workforce pathway mean for addressing labor shortages that only lead to every one of my constituents having to pay more for the goods and services they consume?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, we need legal pathways so that people can take jobs that American citizens are not willing to take. And there has been no movement in that area in decades. And that people are not coming here to bring fentanyl and to kill people. They're coming here primarily to work and to seek protection. And we need a system that actually identifies the people that are coming here for legitimate purposes and to give them legal pathways to do that and to identify the bad actors. But we don't have that right now. Our system is totally out of control because we have not resourced it.
Great. Thank you. Yield back.
Who's paying for all this travel? How's he getting there? What's the purpose? Is it official travel or book travel? So as it turns out, media being media, they started asking some hard questions a few weeks ago. And the Florida legislature being the Florida legislature, well, this happened.
So Governor Ron DeSantis, you ready for this? He quietly signed a new bill making his travel records a secret. Yeah, this measure blocks law enforcement agencies from sharing any records about his security and travel, either past or in the future. It also protects the travel information of people whose services are requested by the governor. The bill is highly unusual, especially here in Florida, where public access to state records is enshrined in the state constitution. Republicans claim, though, that the move was necessary to protect the governor. We'll continue to follow that story.
Right? So as the media starts asking questions about Ron DeSantis' travel habits, the Florida legislature comes right in and creates a law, not just blocking his travel arrangements for the future, but actually backdating him all the way back to the first day he became governor, forbidding law enforcement agencies to even giving out any information about his travels, all because of his security. No other governor in this country has to have that much security. And the truth is, they're just covering his ass, because here's why. Politico first had the first story a few weeks ago on his trip to Japan. Who paid for it? As it turns out, he's been traveling in private jets, Gulfstreams, Bombardiers, getting around. Now, last year, Ron DeSantis reported a personal wealth of $319,000. Now, I don't know about you guys. I couldn't afford a private jet on that kind of pay, but Ron DeSantis can. And here's why. New York Times is out the story today, this week, 2 days ago, actually. And wow, did they find a lot. Turns out they've identified 55 separate donors and wealthy individuals, mostly from Florida, who've been giving Ron DeSantis free flights on their private jets or arranging them for him. These people range from oil and gas people, builders, healthcare, insurance, people who have had business in front of the Florida government. But since it's all being held privately, it's not official business, nobody's been reporting it because at the state level, they don't really have to. It was interesting because the New York Times reporters talked to half a dozen lobbyists in Tallahassee saying they've gotten used to regularly getting calls from political aides to the governor of the state asking for free travel on jets, or their clients' jets, corporate jets and private jets. And a lot of this has been funded by a mysterious dark money group, a 501c4. If you're not familiar with it, it's a nonprofit that's not supposed to do political activity, but they can take unlimited amounts of money and not report the names of their donors. These are the guys you hear about a lot taking money. This mysterious group, And to the Republic, was formed in late January. Oddly, right about the time that Ron decided he was going to try running for president. Hell of a coincidence. And they help people go to things. They've actually arranged, apparently, his visits to 8 different states, almost a dozen speaking engagements, ostensibly for his book tour. And they have sent 3 of those to South Carolina, Nevada, and Iowa, which, of course, anyone knows are early primary states.
I want to show you the texture of the right-wing hellscape that DeSantis is rapidly transforming Florida into. Now, full disclosure, I know people will email me, but David, you say these things about Florida and then you go to Florida, okay? I also said things that are terrible about Donald Trump, and I lived in the United States when Trump was president. So yes, there are parts of Florida that I think are great, even though they have infrastructure problems as a result of Ron DeSantis and right-wing state policy. Those liberal parts of Florida with the good restaurants, as Alex Jones would say, Yeah, I frequently go there, and I don't understand how that devalues in any way the criticism of the policy that DeSantis has put in place. So CNN recently had this list that they put up. Let's take a look at it. In recent times, Ron DeSantis has signed a 6-week abortion ban, ended concealed weapons permits, the requirement for such permits, banned gender-affirming care for trans youth, restricted drag shows, expanded the Don't Say Gay law, blocked an advanced placement African-American studies curriculum class, and prohibited vaccine mandates.
And that probe led, of course, to the Mueller investigation, which was deemed a huge and long-running legal success with many convictions. The report itself, I mentioned yesterday, over 300 pages, and as the New York Times put it, this report from Barr's hand-picked prosecutor had little substantial new information, failed to produce the kinds of blockbuster revelations impugning the FBI that Trump had sought. Also, to be clear, they're ending with a report and not a bunch of charges. Now, the Mueller investigation did have a report. It was initially under seal, but you may remember many trials and convictions. They don't have that here. There's no new indictments this week. There's no new referrals. There's no evidence of improper motivation on the part of the public servants who opened the Russia probe, who were later maligned by Trump. So those are the facts. Now, what do you do if you're Fox News? You've been in trouble for lies recently, but you now have another story that is not what apparently Trump and the allies and MAGA wanted to hear. Well, we're going to show you what they're telling their audience despite the raw truth of what this report found. Take a look.
I'm going to find it hard tonight to smile, because this is on a night where it's confirmed that the FBI worked to rig the outcome of an American presidential election.
Yeah, it is outrageous that this happened. It is arguably worse than Watergate when you look at all the facts.
This is embarrassment to the FBI, the Bureau. This is so damning.
We find out Hillary was the one who was cooking this plan up.
Kari Lake lost again in court, and this is a compilation of a few moments from this press conference that she held.
Just ruled that our elections can run lawlessly. The courts have ruled that anything goes. Well, we can play by those same rules, okay? If anything goes, then anything goes. And we are going to start chasing ballots like you've never seen. And I've got an army of moms and dads and citizens behind me who are ready to chase ballots. Because if it's just a ballot that matters, then we can chase ballots too. Hey, if the left plays that way, maybe we should start playing that way.
Yes.
And you know what?
I love that when one person goes, yes.
We're going to inundate them with so many mail-in ballots, their heads are going to spin. To continue pushing our case to the United States Supreme Court.
So brave.
Because we've got to fight this.
Pumped crowd, guys. She's now saying they just are okay with anything happening, which is not true. They're okay with legal things happening, and only legal things were happening. You couldn't prove otherwise. Okay.
Pompeo in there saying that we've lost 3 straight elections, that it's time to change the strategy, maybe appeal out to more moderate voters. You just lost an election. What say you to that?
Well, they like to say we lost elections. We're having corrupt, stolen elections, okay? We're having corrupt, stolen elections. President Trump won that election in 2020. He did. There was corruption. I know you don't believe it and you don't want to look at it. And they stole the election from me, and you guys have...
But don't you think you really lost the election because you didn't reach out to the McCain voters? You told the McCain voters to get out of the room.
No, it didn't.
And you campaigned hard MAGA.
That's fake news.
I went to your last event.
Did you hear that?
And frankly, we're scared. We're scared of an Obama presidency. First of all, I want to be president of the United States, and obviously I do not want Senator Obama to be. But I have to tell you, he is a decent person and a person that you do not have to be scared as president of the United States. Now, now look, if I didn't think I wouldn't be one heck of a lot better president, I wouldn't be running, okay? And that's the point. That's the point.
I got to ask you a question. I do not believe in, I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not.
No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you.
Yes. And she said, that's fake news. It's very much not. This was from her 2022 gubernatorial campaign.
We don't have any McCain Republicans in here, do we? All right, if you get the hell out. It was the party of McCain. It was I know.
So I don't think it's a good strategy in a purple state to alienate and demonize a part of your own party, McCain Republicans. I'm sorry to do it to you, everyone, but I must do it. Marjorie Taylor Greene, let's talk about her once again. I have made very clear that I am increasingly exhausted whenever talking about this individual. She is very offended that people call her a white supremacist. She thinks that being called a white supremacist is the same as being called the N-word as a black person. Now, if you need me to explain why those two things are worlds apart, I don't know what to do with you. But obviously it's an attempt for her to both downplay the significance of the N-word and also make herself out to be the biggest victim in the world.
And I want to say this, I've already said it once. When people accuse a white person of white supremacy baselessly, and that is a baseless accusation against me. It's wrong, it's hurtful,
We'll see how baseless it is in just a second.
Insulting, and it's just like a black person being called the N-word. And I think that is wrong and hurtful and disgusting. And so I will not tolerate being called that, and I thank you for calling it out for exactly what it was. And I want to say this, I've already...
Well, she posted this video of her working out. See if you can catch a specific thing in the background. Do you see? This is from the Patriot Takes. As the Patriot Takes Twitter account highlighted, I didn't catch this when I watched the video, but it says, there's a Confederate flag cooler in Marjorie Taylor Greene's garage.
This is Michael Popok, Legal AF. Grand juries are secret. Proceedings about grand juries by the supervising chief judge of the Federal Circuit Court are also secret. Appeals from those orders are secret. Then how am I going to do this hot take? I'm going to tell you what happened recently in a secret appeal involving Jack Smith's, one of his lead lawyers, against a giant lawyer who represents social media companies like Twitter and like Meta and Facebook and all of that. The grand jury and all those grand juries, we think there's at least 4 of them against Donald Trump. One related to Jan 6 insurrection, one related to witness tampering, one related to Mar-a-Lago, one related to his fundraising and grift to collect money from his donors and commit wire fraud while he was doing it, using it for improper purposes. All of those grand juries are supervised by the chief judge sitting in D.C. The chief judge used to be Beryl Howell. She stepped down from being the chief judge. Her 2-year term was up, and Jeb Boasberg stepped forward. So what is it about social media companies and Jack Smith's lead lawyers? What's it all about? Here's what it's all about. Social media companies, of course, are repositories for information, tweets, so, other communications. And yes, you can get it. You can get these things off of people's phones and off of people's laptops when you indict them and you do search warrants. But there's things that are missing, either because they have used encrypted material to protect themselves, or they've erased it or deleted it, and the government has some limitations on how far with their technology they can go back and pick up these things. So they obviously want what is in the hands directly on the servers of these social media companies as it relates to their prosecutions and investigations against Donald Trump and others. So the head-to-head that was in court just recently was an oral argument in front of a 3-judge panel. Jim Pierce on behalf of the government, Ari Holtzblatt, his lawyers at WilmerHale, we believe, on behalf of social media companies, fighting it out over these subpoena issues, and a ruling that goes all the way back to January that we didn't even know about because it was, what's the theme of today's hot take? Secret. So if you're worried about any Trumpers or right-wing MAGA being on there, don't worry. We have Cornelia Pollard, Obama appointee. So Judge Cornelia Pollard, Judge Michelle Childs. Remember, she was on the short list to be on the U.S. Supreme Court, and she was selected for that court by Biden. And Florence Pan, also selected by Biden. Judge Pan, Judge Childs, Judge Pollard, right? That's the panel. 1 Obama, 2 Biden. Cherry, 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 if you're playing the justice slot machine at home. And that's the panel. I'm sure the Department of Justice is rubbing its hands in glee because they got the panel that they want. They have generally batted about 900, from what we can determine after the fact, in front of the chief judges who are responsible for the grand jury. In other words, when Jack Smith's team wants something, they get it. If they want to strip somebody of their executive privilege because they worked in the White House or they're an advisor of the president and they don't want to testify using that privilege, or Trump doesn't want them to, it gets stripped all the way up to Mike Pence.
And former President Trump was in courtroom, this time via video conferencing, as a judge set a tentative trial date for next March in the case in which he's charged with buying business records. Mr. Trump threw his hands in the air as they advised everyone against scheduling trial, which the judge scheduled for presidential primary season. Mr. Trump today blasting it as election interference. He has pleaded not guilty.
Representative Bob Good is a Republican, and he decided to go on MSNBC and have a discussion about the debt ceiling. Now, Katie Tur is going to grill him here and ask him some very simple, straightforward questions.
Path of fiscal responsibility.
Let me ask you,
the Biden-Schumer position is only supported by 20% of Americans.
Let me ask a question in here. I know you said that you would have voted for the Trump tax cuts. Would you vote to extend the Trump tax cuts?
Oh, absolutely, because again, that is incentivizing the right things.
The CBO says,
that is key.
That is key. $3.5 trillion to the deficit.
We cannot sustain the 1 to 2% anemic Biden.
Let me ask you a question about the deficit, though. If you are going to vote to extend those tax cuts, that's a $3.5 trillion add to the deficit per the CBO. That is a big addition. If you want to cut spending and you want to get us on a path to a balanced budget, I mean, it seems like that would be in conflict with your goal.
That's historically just inaccurate. Every time we cut taxes, we generate more growth, we generate more revenue. The Democrats predicted back that's simply not true. When revenue as a bottom line number, when you grow the pie, you only have to take a smaller percentage of it to fund your government.
It's not the Democrats. It's the CBO that says this. I'm not naming any Democrats. I'm giving you the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
At the end there, she's literally laughing in his face.
I have countless cases of what I considered impropriety in the White House that I brought to the chief of staff because I thought the way he engaged with women was dangerous. We know these facts. The patterns have laid out, and now this is something that's not just speculation. It's not just allegations. It is a jury of his peers deciding that he did this.
Wait, you brought to Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, or other chiefs of staff, incidents that you witnessed of Donald Trump behaving inappropriately with women?
I did, as well as former White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham and others. Nothing that rises to this level, but things that I would consider improper and that I had a duty to report. And this is all out there. Voters need to pay attention, and folks in my own party need to stop making apologies for this man.
Is there anything more you can tell us about this?
If I'm able to, I will share more.